All right, I'll kick it off here. Thank you everyone for joining us for Hunt Scanlon's webinar, The Rise of the Operating Partner. Today we're joined by some great panelists who are going to discuss the definition of an operating partner, how they're defining it, how they're measuring it, and what they look for. We'll start off with some brief intros here, and then we're going to pepper our panelists with quite a few questions. And I know we have a pretty big turnout here. So participants, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and hopefully we'll have time at the end to get to a few of those. So feel free to jump in as well. So as far as introductions, I'm Jeff Hocking. I'm a partner with On Partners based in San Francisco. I focus on working with private equity firms, operating partner searches, but also portfolio searches for PE firms. I'm going to be co-moderating this with my partner, Tyndall Hein, and I'll let Tyndall introduce herself.
Yeah, Tyndall Hein out of our Atlanta office, and as Jeff said, helping him to co-moderate this.
And with that, we'd love to have the introductions from everyone else. Let's start with Ryan. Ryan Greene, you want to jump in?
Sure. Hey, good morning, good afternoon. Ryan Greene. I'm with Francisco Partners. Been with the firm nearly 9 years, managing operating partner. Look after the human capital functions in particular, and for us, that pertains to everything revolving around executive leadership, board building, HR operations, organizational effectiveness, and other people, culture, and HR related topics inside the portfolio.
Great, thank you. Steve, you want to go next?
How you doing? I'm Stephen Berman. I'm with Accel-KKR. I'm our Director of Executive Search. I deal a lot with the talent needs of our portfolio.
And then we'll call on Anna.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. Anna Tye. I'm a partner at Carlyle on the investing side of the house. I've been at the firm about 13 years, focused on technology and our flagship fund, which is a $22 billion fund today.
Welcome. And then leaves Ed.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Jeff. So I'm Ed Richards. I'm the COO at Marlin Operations Group. So Marlin Operations Group is the operating arm of Marlin Equity Partners. And like Ryan and actually Steve and Anna, we're focused on making controlled investments in B2B software and tech-enabled businesses. So I actually built and I lead our portfolio operations group broadly. It's about 30 or so professionals spread across our US and European businesses. So my role involves setting the strategic direction, kind of product development, performance management of that group. I'm also involved in 100-day and strat planning for our portfolio companies in a kind of board member or observer role as well. So good to meet you all.
Awesome. Well, Tyndall and I are going to tag team here on questioning, but I'll jump in here first. But we'd love to hear from all of you on the first question. But how do you define the operating partner role, and how is it utilized within your firm? And we're finding every PE firm defines it a little bit differently, but maybe we'll go in reverse order. We'll start with Ed.
Well, we actually retired the title operating partner quite a few years ago. But as I said, we actually have a pretty sizable operating team, about 30 or so portfolio-facing people, at least. We organize the team into kind of 4 cohorts with really quite well-defined roles. So the first cohort is what many people think of as an operating partner. We call them operating execs. These are typically multi-time ex-CEOs, software CEOs in our case. They've typically all had a number of successful exits. They are typically, towards the last third of their career, and they are there to really focus. They're the executive chairperson of 3 to 5 portfolio companies, and they are there principally to drive strategy or work with the management team on driving strategy, helping to assemble the management team, and also helping drive an operating cadence through that management team. So that's the first cohort. The second cohort is really around functions. So we've built out functional capabilities around go-to-market, product, finance, and so on. And these are really functional specialists. They may have been CFOs or RevOps leaders in companies or CTOs in portfolio companies. And that's been an area of great growth for us. And the third cohort of operating partners is what we call operating directors. These are typically ex-Big Four type characters, and they're really managing a broad-based value creation program. In many ways, they're the glue that brings all the different functions together. And the last kind of operating cohort is really cross-portfolio specialists, not necessarily operating partners per se, but folks who are driving data, procurement, real estate, and so forth right across the portfolio. And so we have a very well-defined framework and engagement model for each of those groups and the individuals they're in.
It's very organized. Thank you. Anna, how does Carlyle look at the same thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, so I'd say we've evolved over time. If you think back to the heritage of the firm, we've been around 35 years. I would say, in the beginning and for many years, and it still exists today, but it's shifting, our operating executive were oftentimes CEOs, former CEOs of big name companies. And we still have, a number of, a lot of those people are still very closely affiliated with the firm and incredibly helpful. And so, but I would describe that bucket as typically, more seeking to be kind of value-added board members and network extenders, but, not looking for this to be kind of their quote unquote full-time job. So that's one bucket that we have and that we maintain. What we've done over the past several years is, certainly not to the same level in terms of quantum as what Ed described, but developed more and more of that kind of functional expertise. So Carlyle as a firm is multi-sector in nature, and we have a ton of global portfolio companies. So we have a team of, they're called Global Portfolio Solutions, but it is the effectively the operating executives, people who operating specialists in talent, procurement, digital, back office IT that work across the portfolio, across all sectors, not just tech, to help leverage the benefit of those areas of expertise in the global scale of the firm in a way, that we think can be differentiated. And then the third layer that we have is, again, being a tech-focused investor myself, in the environment's increasingly competitive, we have started, and this has been more recent for us, we have started to build out on top of those other two layers, more software-specific areas of value creation, because, obviously there are a lot of nuances there, with the idea being that these people, and it's go-to-market, it's product, it's a lot of the things that Ed talked about, the idea being that these people can help us not only on diligencing opportunities, having confidence in the case that we underwrite, but then also post-acquisition, really taking ownership alongside the key functional areas on the management team to deliver on what was identified in diligence. So it's similar concepts, but slightly different ways that we come at it.
No, interesting. So, Steve, Accel-KKR, how do they look at the definition?
Yeah, when we think about operating partner, that keyword's partner, and we partner both with deal teams and the executives within our portfolio companies with the same goal to drive value. So I'll try not to piggyback too much from Anna or Edward. The way that I think about it, there's two groups. There's generalists and specialists. Generalists would come from those management consulting firms that we all know of. Specialists come with more operating experience. And then how we're utilized, we're here to drive value, right? So it's everything from perspective on due diligence before we get a company in the portfolio, and then once they're in the portfolio, helping them with long or short-term project work. And I'm going to turn my camera off for 1 second to close the blind because I can see my face is coming.
No problem. Hey, Ryan, do you see any differences?
Yeah, I'll just contribute a little bit more beyond what we've shared. Stephen took the words out of my mouth. Literally, I was going to stress the partner aspect. We really do try to saddle up with our teams, incumbent or new management teams within the portfolio, and get a look working with them during diligence with our deal teams, carry that string all the way through, kind of through post-closing, all the way through exit, trying to be a partner to them every step of the way. And so we fancy ourselves as really being utility players. So that means we can step in and help drive the ball, help drive execution if that's what's required, extra hands, arms, legs, whatever you need. If it means an interim capacity, we can step in and do that. A lot of us work on the boards in advisory capacity. And there's a lot of work we do just generally across the functional groups, if you will, to drive value creation, not just through playbooks, but also through specific diagnostics that build a value creation plan that's specific to an asset. And so we really try to meet the companies where they are, be situational, circumstantial, and wear the hat they need us to wear. And so we have a pretty scrappy, I guess is probably the best way I describe it, group of former executives. All of my colleagues are former operating executives. They've worn the CFO hat, the CTO hat, the CMO, CRO hat, very similar to some of the comments already made about how some of the groups are structured. And then we have a group of ex-CEOs as well, who advise a lot of our CEOs in role or stand in as interims when need be. So we're a transformation-oriented, growth-focused, later-stage private equity firm. So it does require a bit more hands-on work with our executives, but I'd say we try to do it in the most collaborative and circumstantial way. And that's what we hear time and time again from our executives.
Great.
Yeah, let's move on. Next question. Have you guys seen the demand for operating partners increase over time? Has it been recently? Kind of, if so, how and why? Stephen, why don't we start with you?
Sure, happy to go first. So I think there's two ways to look at the question: demand coming from deal teams and demand coming from the portfolio companies directly. I would say deal team demands remain pretty consistent, and demand coming directly from the portfolio companies is obviously very company dependent. So the operating partner model has been around long enough that most executives have experience with operating partners, and they carry that baggage, both positive and negative, with new sponsors whenever they go from company to company. In general, and obviously this is my opinion, it seems to be trending up, maybe because our executive leadership teams, even if initially hesitant, understand the value in aligning with us and understanding that we're all part of the same team with the same goals moving forward.
Yeah.
Ryan, you want to comment, or anyone else jump in?
Yeah, I can jump in here. I mean, I think I have seen the demand spike quite a bit. We really strive for more of a pull demand versus a push, and we want that coming from our executives, which is why we really try to strike that relationship right at the deal closing or even before that, such they know we're on their side throughout the journey. As we've dabbled into new areas of functional expertise and built out some of our centers of excellence, there's a clear demand every time we introduce a new skill set or new competency or new value creation program. The response has been huge. So I think, there's been a great demand coming from our companies as they learn more about what we can and are able to do through our capability set. It continues to grow. The other thing we do is at every annual conference of our CEOs, CFOs, and other functional executives, we ask specifically what other services, offerings, competencies, expertise would you like to see build out on this team? So, I mean, we might be a bit of a victim of our own making there, but we continue to hear from them about what evolving needs they have so that we can think about team construction and inform how we build out the future recruits.
Yeah, and I would just add from the investor's perspective, like 100% demand has increased. I mean, I always say I'm an investor. I'm not an operator. I've never been an operator. I've never run anything. And so for me, investing in businesses, to have an operator or a set of operators kind of shoulder to shoulder with me throughout the diligence process at the board level, driving value is hugely valuable. And so definitely, when I think about my job, and just the market's become so competitive that it's not as easy to generate returns. And so you really have to do it through adding real value. And so the more operational expertise you have to do that, the better from my perspective.
That's great. We talked about the profile, and there was a lot of overlap, much more than I actually thought. But let's talk about the attributes or competencies of a great operating partner, or maybe someone who hasn't been successful. What didn't they have? But Ed, want to talk about the attributes or competencies to be successful at Marlin?
I mean, I'll make some generalizations. I'm sure applicable to everyone here. I mean, ultimately, there's a couple of things, and something that Steve touched upon and Ryan too. First of all, the mindset is the partnership approach. There's no, if you have a mindset where you go in and you're going to tell people what to do, then that's a failure. You're going to fail, and you're going to fail on every dimension possible. So number one, a mindset is about helping people, and it's about making sure everyone realizes we're in the same boat. And you achieve that by behavior and also incentives. That's an obvious statement. The other obvious statement is, certainly, if you look at some of the much larger firms, and perhaps Anna, some of the talent you refer to, so very, very senior, mega industry figures, where perhaps they're more senior advisor type roles. I see those as rather different to operating partner roles, where you're basically buying their experience, their network, their talent, their brand, and so forth, but not necessarily real execution work. And I think that for whatever the version of operating partner, the nomenclature, they are real work. They're real jobs with real hard work, whether you are a senior ex-CEO or whether you are running an IT transformation program. It's real hands-on work and an appetite, therefore, you've got to want to do that, and you've got to continue to want to do that wherever you are in your career, even at the the top end of that. So totally obvious statements. The other thing I would say is an actual commitment to actual developing output. So it's quite easy to develop opinions and offer words, but actual output, written output in particular, I've always found that folks who like to write tend to be more successful than folks who like to talk, if I can simplify it in that regard. So those are three of the characteristics I see as being relevant ones, and the inverse of those results in the inverse of success.
Yeah, understand. Anna, anything to add from Carlyle about competencies or attributes?
I mean, honestly, I think Ed said it perfectly. I totally agree. I think if somebody's looking to come in and they just want to, sit on a bunch of boards and make some smart comments 4 times a year, then that's not really what we're looking for ultimately for the role that is needed here at the end of the day. And so it's to Ed's point, like having had all the experiences to be able to add that level of value, but also still having the energy and desire to really roll up your sleeves and work hard. And then of course, high EQ and ability to work well with management teams. Those are the 2 I would highlight.
It is amazing. There is a disconnect in the market because a lot of people want to be an operating partner because they do think it's four times a year at the board level.
Yeah. I think we all want that job, but I don't know.
Steve or Ryan, and anything different from your firms?
To piggyback a little bit, and at the risk of sounding very corny, I think empathy is super important. Mm-hmm. Being an executive can be very lonely. A lot of people counting on you. You have to make a lot of decisions every day very quickly. So developing that trust, showing alignment, showing that you can provide value, not just because you've been there and done that, but because you understand what they're feeling, is a really important trait, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. A lot of this is really built on the ability to toggle between jumping in and executing, to Ed's point, but then also knowing how to influence and persuade and help shape and coach people through the journey. Because what Ed said as well, these people don't want to be told what to do, and that's not the goal. There are times when you have to jump on the ball and just get stuff done and get in the trenches with them, and they're going to thank you immensely for that. And there are other times we need to step back, listen to them. Listening is very important, and then help them find their way through this challenge and help influence. So I do think the soft skills matter a lot, and the folks I think that we've seen really do well are able to kind of give up the glory, give up the ball at the right time, and not have so much of their own ego or self-worth attached to really delivering and executing and having full control. But it is a balance, right? There's a time maybe, in dire situations when someone goes into an interim role, they do need to take control. But there's also times when the company's in a great stage, and how do you influence and enable folks to take it to the next step? It's not by telling them what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's move into, this came up in everyone's definition of how you guys use operating partners, but more kind of the general versus functional. How are you guys seeing that? We also had a question in the chat of, is it mainly CEOs, or what functions are you seeing, right? So what are the functions that are most highly leveraged when you talk about more of those specialized operating partners? Anna, I want to start with you.
Sure. So I think it's both. So for sure, experienced CEOs are helpful to have in that role, so long as, to the earlier comment, they're still in a position in their lives where they're kind of have it in them to really want to still work hard. And but I think that's definitely an important piece of it. And on the functional side, absolutely for us, and I know it sounds like some of the other folks probably would add some function to this, but for us, we really think about, okay, within software specific, it's go to market and product. And then more generally, we have, chief procurement officer who helps with all things procurement and leverage purchasing. We have a digital chief digital officer. We have a head of talent. We have a CIO who helps with like all things back office IT and cyber. And then, government affairs. So we have a whole bunch of other kind of areas, but I went through the kind of the major ones, at least from our perspective. And I know some of the other folks have kind of CFO functions. We don't do that today, but I think that's another one that I would highlight, or CMOs, which kind of sits under our digital umbrella, as I described it. So, but I don't know if others, Ed, Stephen, or Ryan, have other functional areas that they would add, but those are the main ones that stick out to me.
Ed, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'll echo. I mean, like, we're focused principally on software, on B2B software. So we try and align talent or capabilities to the functions, right? And I almost put the CEO function in there as well, because, you know, we think about strategy as a discipline. And so think about your functions, right? So, you know, just, you know, go through it. Talent, product, you know, technology, go to market, which is marketing and sales, you know, customer experience. So services support, customer success, finance, so finance and accounting, and then kind of the enabling functions. So systems, data, big one for us at the moment. So you're really trying to align around, you know, around improving the functions that you're working on. But I'll also say, look, it's really going to be thesis and scale dependent. You know, if you're buying businesses with, you know, if you're buying scaled businesses, if you're doing take privates of multi-billion-dollar revenue businesses, they just need different things to growth stage businesses. They are typically able to attract higher caliber management, right? They've got more money to spend on perhaps higher quality profile solutions, consultants, and so forth. So I think it just really depends where you are in that growth stage, and what do you need to build in the company to support that growth plan and to make it an attractive target to the next owner. So I think it's really going to be dependent on that. But where we're focused on is really trying to, you know, professionalize and institutionalize each of the functions to support growth plan.
Ryan, you want to add?
Sure, I can just tag on a little bit. The CFO group, or I would say broader finance and accounting, is a huge area of value creation for us. We've got a number of former CFOs. Our investments range from growth equity all the way up to, you know, middle market, larger stage, kind of $1 billion plus revenue businesses. So in some cases, we have step-up candidates going into roles, and so our CFOs do a lot of coaching of maybe some of the more junior or new to the role CFOs. But they also have groups around FP&A, financial systems, controllership, and we've really built out a lot of focus, because that is such a pinch point within private equity, and managing that kind of dotted line relationship with the PE firm, but also the solid line to the CEO, make sure we get that fit right, and coaching people so they fire out a candidate as soon as possible. So that's been a big area of focus and growth for us. A couple other functions I would tack on. Customer success has become monumental with so many businesses either now SaaS companies or transitioning to SaaS. So we've invested in capabilities there. Legal function is one we actually put in, and it's gotten resounding reviews. You know, just everything from employment law to transaction related legal questions. You know, it's a long list. I'd say that is one a lot of companies that are on the smaller end may not have proper general counsel, and so that role can take on a fractional type of situation in supporting our companies. And then the last one I'd add, and Ed's group was, I think, one of the early adopters of this, but we found the need for more PMO resources that can manage large scale transactions, whether it's a carve out investment, standing up a new entity, managing all the puts and takes, or whether it's mergers of two existing companies or a new investment. But having some of those capabilities in-house and not always going outside has proven to be a real win for us as well.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the best practices, right? So as you think about using operating partners within the fund, how have you found, and kind of what have you learned over the years that's been most valuable for the role? Ed, Stephen, you want to start?
Do you want to take it away?
But you go for it.
Sure. So, I mean, granted, I've only been in private equity for 18 months or so I can't talk too much about how it's evolved or changed. I can just give my perspective. We're really collaborative as a firm, both with the deal teams as well as with the executive teams. And what I've learned to get the most out of the role is you kind of just have to manage your time. And that's like the most important thing we have, right? Everyone on this panel, everyone listening is very time constrained. So learning to say no is really important, and really guarding what you say yes to, because ultimately we're all judged by our results. And if we say yes to too many things and we deliver B work versus a couple less things deliver A work, I think everyone here would agree we'd rather deliver the A work. So kind of just not biting off more than you can chew and moving forward in that sense.
Yeah, that's well said. The other thing I would say is, I mean, again, obvious statements, but you just got to clarify expectations. Like, what are the expectations of each person at what stage of, of a deal? Like, what do you expect you to do? When do we expect you to speak up? What kind of opinions? What kind of prep should you do? What kind of output should you have? Like, basic stuff can really, the lack of that can be problematic, but it's basic, but it's really critical. And I would just really, the move, especially for the CEO type profile, the move from being, the ultimate executive in the business to being not that, is a tough one. And so clarifying expectations as much as possible, which may, vary somewhat case by case or deal team by deal team. That's a basic, but it's totally critical.
I would just say one more thing to that. Communication is so important because we talk about running ops teams internally. Sometimes you bring in consultants externally. You've got your executive teams. There's a lot of people with a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So making sure there's clear directive on who's responsible for what is really important.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Brian. No, you go.
I was just going to double down on the communication alignment. I think it's also important that the board and the investment team is speaking, from a similar place as the operating team, and we're not actually pushing in different directions. We're not always in all the board meetings, and we're not always in all the executive team meetings we're having. So ensuring that those two groups in the background are staying tightly aligned and making sure we're not asking companies to do 10 things over here and 3 things over here, none of which overlap, is super important. So it does require a little bit of a cadence and requirement on us to stay very plugged in with the investment team and make sure they're apprised of movements we're seeing, things we're involved with, as well as things they're picking up on the board and urging the management team to go deeper on.
Yeah, and the only thing I was going to add is, there's a fine line between advising a management team and kind of making the decisions for them, and particularly at the size and scale where we're operating, like we're kind of expecting management teams to generally know what to do. So one of the things I say to some of our operating partners is that, you guys just got to go in and really listen, and you've been incredibly successful and have a lot of great ideas, but this company's also been successful as well. And so there might be situations where there's a lot of value to be added, but there might be some situations where they're already doing it pretty well. And so let's not kind of feel like we need to micromanage if the company's doing just fine without us intervening. So that's something else. And it goes to the EQ point, clearly.
The competition for deals is through the roof. I don't have to tell all of you that, you know that, but where do you see the operating partner adding value pre-deal, but also post-deal, or even do you utilize operating partners on a pre-deal basis? Would love to hear from all of you.
I can start real quick. I mean, I think we have gotten more and more involved in pre-deal. A lot of our goal when I joined almost 9 years ago, which is hard to believe, was to move away from being purely reactive to being proactive, which is the only way you can scale and the only way to be able to grow our portfolio and keep up with the pace from an operating team standpoint. But that involves really being at the table with the deal team when you're doing diligence, hearing, seeing, evaluating, and obviously diligence cycles have shrunk quite a bit, as we all know. And so you get some view now, but maybe not the full view. But even having that lens before a deal is signed and comes over the fence, and the operating team has to figure out which way is up. Being a part of the process is just, number one, it's good etiquette just to kind of keep informed and kind of know where the puck stands before you jump into the mix. And then number two, I think we're actually able to sell a good bit of our value creation advantage and programs and the partnership that we espouse with a lot of our companies up front as a real differentiator for FP in terms of how we work and the impact we've been able to have working with our companies, not on our companies over the years, and getting to profitable outcomes and exciting returns for our investors. So that is something we sell pretty aggressively, and I think it's been fruitful in a number of cases.
Anna, how's Carlyle look at it?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's critical to have, the operating partners involved in the diligence process. One, to help identify issues, but two, as Ryan alluded to develop that value creation plan, because the world is so competitive now. You have to have your value creation plan pretty well baked at the time you do the deal. And oftentimes, to Ryan alluded to this, oftentimes that's part of our selling point, is sitting down with the sellers or the CEO and saying, okay, here's how we think about the value creation plan. Do you agree? What else should we be thinking about? And here's how our resources can help you accelerate time to value. So I agree, it's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I echo that.
Let's move on. As we think about, I know we talked about best practices, but as you think about success, kind of what defines success here, other than just maybe a successful exit? What does that look like in an operating partner?
I'll take this.
Yeah.
So I have a little thing I talk about, and Jeff knows this. So I've interviewed, I've hired, I don't know, 30 or so people, and I've probably interviewed 500 plus for internal roles, probably more than that actually. I think about it in 3 dimensions. So there is, I would say, outcome based, which is obvious, right? I mean, are we actually seeing progression in the business's performance and and valuation? I would say deliverables based. So are they actually producing content, IP? And that's more candidly more relevant for the non-CEO roles, but are they adding to the body of knowledge of the firm? And the third one is fan-based, i.e. have they developed a fan base? And is there pull on there, like we discussed earlier? Is there demand on them from our investment teams and our portfolio teams? And actually, if you've got number 3, it probably means you've done number 1 and number 2 pretty well. But they all go together. Like it's just part of it's 3 is the indicator that number 1 and 2 have been successful. But we really look for that. I wouldn't say there's like hard measurements for any one of them. But we think about evaluation. Those are 3 dimensions I talk about when I bring people on, and when we think about performance management and so forth.
Anna, anything to add?
I really don't have anything incremental. I think Ed said it well.
So when I was hired, my goal was to keep the deal teams happy. So if someone could help me quantify that, I'd really appreciate it.
I think you'd know if they weren't.
I would hope so. It's funny, you go to conferences and we talk with operating partners, and we know it's a very nebulous role. There are certain things you can point ROI to. Like I do talent, so of course I have my spreadsheet of search fees that I've saved our firm, right? But a lot of it is just allowing people to make decisions quicker, in my opinion. So it's, can we provide information that helps them do that? Can we take something out of a roadblock? Can we leverage our expertise or our network, whatever it might be? It's really, and I think Ed used this analogy earlier, a rising tide lifts all ships. It's just, can we be part of the tide? But in a lot of ways, no, I don't think that you can have like firm ROI on that.
Let's talk about diversity. I mean, it's important across all searches, but one is how do you define diversity, and how are you implementing it in the operating partner model? And we can start with Anna.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think diversity is clearly incredibly important. There are a lot of studies that show diverse teams make much better decisions, and it's not just diversity in ethnicity or gender, but also diversity in areas of expertise. And we've talked about that a lot here, but just looking at a problem or situation from a number of different angles, I think is critical to making sure that you really understand it holistically. So for us, it's really, really important to leverage diverse perspectives and diverse backgrounds in our decision-making process.
Anyone else have a different viewpoint or suggestions?
I would just echo again what Anna said. I think the diversity of backgrounds and mindset is a super important dimension to diversity.
Strong ditto, or maybe it's a tritto at this point. And I would say that we look at diversity really in 4 levels. Internally, how are we doing as a firm, both investment and operating team, and getting better and more diverse perspectives around the table, and that involves everything from recruitment, but also to inclusion, in the workplace, and also retention, making sure we keep our best people. But then also at the portfolio company level, we're spotlight, shining on board level diversity, senior management diversity, and employee level diversity, all 3 of which are critically important to all of us and are going to drive better outcomes. And we're more than convinced of that. And so we have a number of measures and programs we put in place to monitor kind of each of those 3 levels.
And what about you've hired an operating partner, what do those first 90 days look like? What are the highest priorities to make sure this person gets off to a successful start? Anyone want to take it?
I think it's that silly old adage about eating the elephant one ear at a time type of thing. I hate that. I need a better one because I have to use that all the time and I kick myself afterwards. But really, when we have folks come onto this job, it is a little overwhelming. You know, we got 50 plus portfolio companies, all kinds of different company dynamics going on, you know, different requests coming in from all directions, from the deal team, from the companies, and not knowing which way is up and how to best dive in, but to really start with a smaller set. And it is a bit of an apprenticeship model. So finding someone on the team that can guide them through, you know, this is how we typically engage with our companies, you know, shepherding for the first, you know, 2-3 projects to make sure we get the dynamic right, because our culture is critically important in how we engage with executives. We want to make sure that comes off in the right manner, but also want to make sure that they're getting the support from all of our team, know how to plug into the deal team, know how to plug into the operating team, you know, where some of the bodies are buried inside the companies, they have the backstory, but try to gradually step them through. And maybe it starts with 3 to 5 companies in their first at-bats. There's a tendency to want to come in and just, I want to service all the companies and know everything about the portfolio. You really got to meter it out when you're starting someone up or onboarding somebody. And we continue to stress that, you know, just give it time. You'll be overwhelmed and have more needs and requests coming at you could ever imagine. You'll know more about the portfolio than you ever dreamed of, but give it time and kind of stage yourself out here.
I would say something that's really important that we've touched upon: communication. So within the first 30 or 60 days, you should have a regularly scheduled call with anyone that you're going to be working with, any one of your stakeholders. We're very busy. They get canceled all the time, but at the very least, they'll see your name on their calendar. And if they need you, they will reach out and make sure you're pulled into everything.
Yeah. And I would make another obvious statement. I mean, just to folks who are kind of stepping into this role, you know, if in the first 90 days, you can find a way to add value that's helpful and digestible, like do that. Because I think that's the easiest way to, you know, easiest path to success.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was going to say something similar, is like, just find a couple things to focus on where you can make a big impact and do do that for the first little bit. And then people will also recognize and appreciate your value. And it's easier than drinking from the fire hose and trying to figure out where to go.
The last thing I would say is a lot of people join as operating partners with great backgrounds, whether as operators or consultants. And sometimes they come in thinking that they're expected to add value from day one, or to have the same success from day one that they've had in earlier stops. And that's just not the case. Eat a piece of humble pie, whatever analogy you want to use, like come in wanting to learn and understanding there are no stupid questions, and just making sure that you're getting all of your thoughts out there so that people can help you learn as fast as possible.
Great. Let's talk about the future. Let's talk about the near future. No matter what you read, we're going into some headwinds here, maybe a dip, maybe a recession, depending on what you're reading. But how do you see the operating partner, if we do have some headwinds here or severe headwinds, what do you think the operating partner will be doing maybe differently in the next, 12 to 18 months?
I'm not sure we'll be doing things differently. I mean, again, we have a framework-based approach. So we have ways of working and ways of improving our businesses that, candidly, trying to drive profitable growth is relevant in a downturn as well as an upturn, right? And the skill sets you use, perhaps you reprioritize or you resequence some of the things you do. But I think we actually end up doing the same thing. Perhaps you do, perhaps you have a perspective which is somewhat more cautionary, and you're investing more for profitability versus growth, or you're taking that trade-off for a period of time. But I think you do the same things, candidly. We will do the same things.
Yeah, I'll come back to the empathy. The empathy that was described earlier. I mean, this is a time to lean in and bear hug our executives. This is a challenging time, just like going into COVID was. It's obviously not the same, but it's has similar dynamics about. Of course, we're all pursuing new deals and new investments and supporting the diligence and stand up of those and launching value creation programs. But a big part of our team is now focused on really bear hugging our executive teams currently in the portfolio, making sure they can help them see around the corner, know what's coming. Some of our executives, you think about growth equity investments, have never lived through a recession. If that is what's coming, and I don't want to be on record for saying I call it that. But a lot of them have not been through tougher times, and so I do think that bear hug is important, of having folks who've seen this movie before or lived and weathered through it. And if strategy needs to change, if metrics we're thinking about and tracking towards, if hiring needs to change, they can be the boxing coach in the corner to them right now. And so I think that's the mentality I think we're ascribing. I think to Ed's point, a lot of the programs that we would always ascribe our companies to go after it and execute, drive at the same goal regardless of the macro. But I think right now the empathy, being close and helping them, kind of be a sounding board and a boxing coach is important.
That's great.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think one thing that's kind of unique about this current market is that we do have some like lead time here around what might happen and when. And so we have some time to prepare for that and prepare our management teams and companies for that, whether that's with external resources or internal resources, but just at least having the resources and the ability to kind of game plan with our management teams around what scenarios might happen over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, and just make sure we're there to support in any way we can and help weather through those.
That's great. That's great. We've covered a lot today, and we do want to hit some of the audience questions here. I haven't seen all of them, but maybe we can take a couple and see how this sets with all of you. I don't know, Tyndall, do you have any prioritized?
Yeah, no, I think we've gotten a lot of questions about structure, kind of comp model. I know you can't go into every detail, right? But a lot of questions have been, are more operating partners advisors? Are they full-time? Do they get carry in the role? Is it kind of project-based? I'd love to more perspective on that. Anyone want to start it off?
I'll give you perspective on elements of that. I mean, for us, I would say that most of the operating team, I would say 95% of employees, and which is quite rare at that size. We do have a separate operating group which I run, which is dedicated solely to Marlin Company. It's part of the same firm where they are employees of the firm. So we think about all those roles as full-time employees, or most of them. And we try to align incentives with the outcomes we're trying to drive with our management teams, essentially.
Yeah, so we have both. We have some that maybe the kind of would fit more in the senior advisor bucket that we talked about. That is not a full-time role. And then we do have some that are kind of the full-time operating executives that fit within these functional areas that we talked about. And similarly, I've seen it a lot of different ways. I've seen in some cases they get carry in the fund. In some cases, they might get carry or equity in specific deals. And in some cases, and this is more for, these guys are better to speak to this than I am, because we don't do it this way, but sometimes it'll just be a charge back to the portfolio company for the consulting services that are provided. So those are kind of some of the various models that I've seen in terms of how ultimately that role is compensated.
I won't speak to comp, but to talk about what Ryan said, we think of it as circles. So first circle would be anyone employed by Accel-KKR. Second circle would be people we've worked with and have sent consulting projects to already that we know we can call at any time, we can trust, and kind of build out from there.
Perfect. Another one we got is how do you prioritize like which companies get an operating partner, which companies don't? Is it deal size or check size? Is it kind of risk exposure? Does every company under your portfolio have an operating partner? How do you kind of delineate that? Stephen, you want to start?
I don't lead my team. I'm probably the least qualified person on the panel to talk about it, but I don't think it's necessarily the loudest voice in the room. I think we try to think pretty logically. What are problems we can help with? Do we have the resource? Making sure we don't overstaff people, right? So I don't know if it's necessarily check size or burning platform. It's more who's available when, and can they fix whatever the problem is.
Yeah. I mean, with us, we have, I would say that virtually, just say substantially all our businesses have a full team with an operating executive who's the chairman or chairperson, We have a program manager, and then we deploy, then we roll in our, we run assessments for each of the functions, and the functional leaders are involved in that. So there's each company has basically a full team. They will not remain for the entirety of the investment. Typically the operating executive does, and potentially the ops director does as well. But the functions come in, they assess the business, they create a plan, they execute the plan, monitor the improvement, and then typically roll on to the next business. It just doesn't scale, and it's not necessary to have them full time, in perpetuity.
Yeah, I just think for us, it's the area of greatest impact, right? So sometimes that might be the bigger checks, just because there's a lot of dollars there. But a lot of times it's associated with our value creation plans, and are there certain areas where we feel like our resources can bring differentiated value to the table? And usually the answer is yes, or else we're not investing in the company. And so, but it's not always the same, it's not always the same area for each company. So it just kind of depends, looking holistically at where the greatest impact can be made.
Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit of art and science, right? There's talking about how we're trying to create all this pull demand. When the pull demand comes, you can't always control those waves, and when they come in and which companies are coming in from. So there's a need to be responsive to that demand we are trying to create. But I'd say we still try to keep true north on largest equity checks, largest investments, and also from a timing standpoint, like I mentioned earlier, really getting involved at inception of a deal to lay the tracks. And so that's very important, because a lot of times we're going to be involved in some of the actual diligence to closing activities. If it's a carve out, if it's take private, there's a lot of operational work to be done. So that will often prompt our involvement as it is, but we also think that's important, again, to set the right foundation. And it's better to get involved early and have your impact kind of run the entire maturity of the investment, rather than waiting 2 years and waiting for something to break or the first wheel to squeak and then getting involved and you miss things and missed opportunities.
Also, the idea of getting involved early, I mean, I think everyone's made these points here about building relationships. And if you build the relationships up front, and even if even if the engagement is short up front, you build those relationships, so it's much more natural to come in afterwards if we need to help, bring surge help later on.
As we think about recruiting operating partners, is it folks typically within your network? Is it folks typically they've worked with the Marlin or Francisco Partners, Carlyle, KKR, right? Is it, as folks think about wanting to be an operating partner, any advice, or kind of where do you end up finding talent?
We sometimes work with this amazing search firm called On Partners.
It's about time we heard that.
There you go.
Yeah.
Requisite plug,
I
said.
There you go.
Personally did that.
All right. Any others?
I mean, just being somewhat less glib. I think I would say that most of our, not all of them, but most of our team, we can engage an exec search firm, and they've been formal search processes, rigorous. They take a long time, and interview a lot of people. It's a very, very rigorous process. We see these as long-term commitments. People coming into the firm, it's a long-term role. So you have to get it right. But and we have some people on the team who've come through our network, or we've worked with before, perhaps have been Marlin CEOs before, but most people have been through a retained search, including you two here on the call.
But I would say, and I think I tend to agree with that. For us, it's been a hybrid, but I do tend to agree. Absolutely. But I would say, for folks who are in certain roles at sponsor-backed companies, just trying to be the best at what you're doing and do a great job and add a lot of value can lead to a lot of opportunities. I mean, I've certainly had executives that have worked at I've taken from a lot of different companies over the years because they did a great job in that situation. And so we bring them to another company, and and ultimately, at times kind of can move into an op exec kind of role. So I do think there's a lot of different paths to ultimately get there.
Yeah, we're big fans of pulling directly from our portfolio. We've seen executive, and again, some that's based on the model we espouse, and the more functional led model where we want operating experience and the chance that we've seen these executives in action in one of our companies make it through a great exit. They know the playbook, so to speak. It's not really a total playbook, but they know the game. They've been on the inside. We've had a working relationship with them. Mitigates a lot of risk of making outside hires, and it's actually it's great to have people who've been there, done that, working with people that are new to the journey. And so that's been a good formula for a lot of our internal hires.
Awesome. I'll take one or two more. I like this new one. Has the deal partner's role changed at all as you've grown the operating partner model? Anna, maybe this is an interesting one for you, but how has the deal partner changed?
It's a great question. I mean, for me, I just feel like I have more tools in my toolkit than I would have in the past because, pre the days of true operating partners, you kind of were doing a lot of things more in isolation or relying on consultants or maybe like some outside relationships. But when you have folks internal to the firm who you've worked with over a long period of time across a number of different companies and situations, you do develop that level of trust and you kind of know, okay, this is where this person can come in and add a ton of value. And like this person's going to be really impressive to a management team because of this or what have you. And so as a deal partner, I do feel like it just brings me a lot more weapons I can bring to the table to help try to win deals and add value.
Oh, I mean, anyone else? I guess your perspective is probably a little bit different. We actually, one question that was just for you is kind of as you talked about the different personas of folks, how would you contrast what you described as number 2, kind of the functional leader specialist versus number 4, more the enabling capability leader? And I think that interest was really around kind of when does this switch flip from more of an individual specialist to a firm-wide need?
It's a good question. I think they're just different disciplines. I mean, some people, some are capabilities that are really less about. So if you think about the functional ones, they're about really trying to improve, or not trying to, actually improving the functions within an individual portfolio company. So they're really working deeply with that company to improve how that business, how that function operates. I think that's somewhat distinct, somewhat separate from programs that we run across the portfolio that that leverage the power of the portfolio. So leverage procurement, for example. We're not going in and helping improve procurement functions in our companies, but we're bringing the capability of lots of nicely negotiated deals and negotiation capabilities to those companies. It's a bit nuanced, but it's more about bringing the capability across that function versus trying to improve the function inside a business. They're just different capabilities that we have.
Great. Anyone else? Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all the panelists. We've all learned a lot today. I know I have. Want to thank Hunt Scanlon as well for allowing us to have this platform and get everyone together. This webinar, I want to thank the audience as well. We had quite a few people join us today, and this webinar will be reposted on the Hunt Scanlon website later on this week. And really appreciate everyone's time today, and looking forward to the next one as well.